Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the development of our long-range transportation plan. My name is Colleen Nicklin, and I'm a senior transportation planner with the River to Sea Transportation Planning Organization. And on behalf of the TPO, I'd like to welcome you to our virtual workshop on the development of the 2045 Long-Range Transportation Plan. This is the second viewing of this workshop as we presented the same material this morning at 10 a.m. The purpose of today's workshop is twofold. One is to provide an overview of the development of our long-range transportation plan, which is also called Connect 2045, and also to present information on the development of the preliminary cost feasible plan, which is a component of Connect 2045. The second purpose is to receive your input. Community input is an essential component to the development of this plan, and we are here today to hear from you on what is important to you as we develop your community transportation plan. I would like to introduce you to the workshop team. You will be hearing our voices throughout the presentation. Again, my name is Colleen Nicklin, and I'm a senior planner with the River to Sea TPO and the Connect 2045 project manager. Also on the line is the TPO Executive Director, Lois Bolenbach. Our consulting team with Kimley Horn and Associates is represented by Mr. William Roll, who is the consultant project manager, and Mr. Jim Wood, who is the deputy project manager. The agenda for the workshop is we'll give an introduction and presentation, followed by a period to respond to your comments and questions that are received during the workshop. And then we'll repeat the presentation approximately halfway through the workshop. This will provide the opportunity if there's something that maybe you had missed during the presentation or had questions on and you weren't quite sure. And also for anyone else who logs in after 5:30, this will give them the opportunity to hear the presentation as well. We will then respond to any additional questions received and then close the workshop. Following the workshop, we will be posting a recording of the presentation to our website and also be posting the questions received during the workshop along with the answers to the questions. So how do you provide comments? During the workshop, you can provide comments through the question drop-down box, which is located on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. When you type in your question, we will receive them and we will be able to read them back out aloud and provide a response. Additionally, you can submit your comments via email or through the Connect 2045 website. My email is posted on the screen. During the workshop, the easiest way to submit a question is through the question drop-down box, but feel free to also submit questions via email or through our website, either during the workshop or anytime following the workshop as well. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mr. Jim Wood.
All right, thank you, Colleen, and a good evening, everybody. For those of you who may not know, the River to Sea TPO is a federally designated agency that's responsible for planning and programming transportation funds, and its coverage is for the area that's in green on the map, which is all of Volusia County and the eastern portion of Flagler County. Now, Florida has 27 of these transportation planning agencies, and they play a pivotal role in planning transportation and then defining community needs and priorities. On the next slide, we talk about Connect 2045. It is the long-range transportation plan for the TPO. There are different types of plans that the TPO prepares, but this one has a horizon of 25 years, looking far into the future, and it is updated every 5 years. We will talk at a point later about cost feasible plan and projects, and that refers to the fact that we have revenue projections, and then we, within those revenue projections, then define projects that will become part of this plan. So we're evaluating the options and trying to make decisions at this point to plan for the long-range transportation future. The goals of the plan are comprehensive, and this is the set of goals that was approved already by the board of the TPO. And under each of these, there's several objectives. But the intent here is to have policy direction for all of the decisions that are made in the planning process. And it covers everything from environmental issues to economic, and then all of the transportation side of multimodal connectivity, and then safety, which is very important. So the plan is more than just a set of projects. It is a policy document as well. The schedule that we've been moving through in terms of public involvement includes focus group workshops that we had in January, public workshops related to the needs process in February, and then where we are today, the workshops where we're hearing more from you about the priorities that we're looking to define as part of this plan. And all of this drives toward the September hope for adoption of the Connect 2045 plan. I had mentioned the goals before, and they're intended to be kind of a 360 view of the many issues that'll be part of the plan. But at the same time, there are various themes that are important to look at and to consider as part of the plan. So these include technology changes and emerging technologies and how they transform transportation in new ways and how the pace of this technological change is accelerating. So we're talking about various things such as automated or self-driving vehicles that are growing in prominence, electric vehicles, shared mobility, and other different technologies that will change how we move around in the future. Resiliency reflects our ability to mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and then recover after disruptive events, and then more sustained processes that happen. So this could include flooding, hurricane impacts, wildfires, and then issues like sea level rise. So it's important to consider how that may affect the way in which we plan transportation. And then finally, funding choices is always critical. What we focus here on is primarily federal and state funding. We'll talk a little bit, you'll hear about local projects as well. But the intent is to understand what is the revenue sources that are out there and how we can make the decisions that are the right decisions to meet the needs for the region. Then transportation choices are so critical to this because we're trying to look at various modes, such as bicycle and pedestrian movement, transit, and roadways. And it's important to look at these collectively and how they integrate into an intermodal connected system. On the next slide, we talk about a little bit about bicycle and pedestrian. Importantly, the TPO, and through this process, would likely have a policy to set aside, or has an existing policy to set aside funding for bicycle and pedestrian facilities, the types of facilities you see here, sidewalks, bike lanes. And then this area has benefited from a lot of work to create a very extensive trail system. And so that's also an important part of this effort. And even as we look at roadway projects, there is consideration given to those roadway projects that are helping to improve bicycle and pedestrian connectivity. And on the next slide, we look at that same relationship with transit. The same thing happens with roadway projects. We look at those who provide, or which provide, enhanced access to transit and public transportation. So those needs for transit are defined in transit development plans that happen outside of this process but are related to it. And there are dedicated sources of funding that exist at the federal and state level for those to keep those systems operational. So I want to now turn it over to William, who's going to talk about the roadway side.
All right, thank you very much, Jim. Well, so I'd like to talk to you about the cost-feasible roadway plan. And a good way of doing that is to break up the component pieces of the roadway transportation network into their pieces, because that's how we have to report them in the plan. There's three major groups of roadways. The first group of roadways are the state strategic intermodal system. And those are the major roads, the kind of roads that if you were traveling to Miami or Tallahassee or even trying to leave the state and go someplace else in the country, it's those major roads, the interstates, roads like State Road 40. They're roads that are important not only locally, but on a statewide basis. And so as a result, those project improvements are prioritized on a statewide basis. So to the extent that a project is in Volusia-Flagler counties and it's on the strategic intermodal system, it's having to compete with every other major SIS project in the state for funding. The next group of projects is other state roads or other arterial roadways and local initiatives. And so this is reflects a funding source that the TPO actually gets to set the priority. So through this process, we are setting the priority of how the money in Group B selects and funds projects and local initiatives. And then lastly, there's the Group C roadways, which is all the other major local roadways, and typically these are county roadways, being either Flagler or Volusia County roadways. And in that case, the individual local government jurisdiction is responsible for those roadways. They're responsible for funding those roadways and maintaining those roadways. And so as a result, it's those local entities and their governance process that defines what the priority will be for those roadways. We have to reflect what their priorities and cost feasible plans are. I always like to highlight the fact that the level of need is greater than what we can afford, and that's typical with any plan of this nature. In the next slide, I'd like to start talking about the projects. So I mentioned that first group of projects is strategic intermodal system, and the Florida Department of Transportation has published a 5-year, a 10-year, and a 2045 cost feasible set of improvements. And what's reflected here in this table is those projects which the Florida Department of Transportation has deemed cost feasible for construction through the year 2045. And it includes a lot of major corridors, as we mentioned before. The first 4 projects are all actually part of one project. It's the widening of I-4, and it includes 3 major interchange connections and interchange improvements. Then we also have US 17, State Road 40, the interchange at I-95 LBJ Boulevard, an interchange at Pioneer Trail, and a new interchange improvement at US 1 on the north side, and then also a widening of State Road 100. The last project you see listed there is a developer-funded project. So this is the new interchange at Interstate 95 and Maytown Road, and there's a development agreement in place that requires a developer to pay for and fund that improvement. Next slide. So these are additional strategic intermodal system roadways, but these projects are currently unfunded needs. The state has not identified funding to be able to complete these particular projects, but part of our process in developing the transportation plan allows us to articulate to the Florida Department of Transportation locally what we perceive as needs and to help give these other roadway segments or other improvements the opportunity to move forward. I do want to highlight the Tomoka River Bridge. So technically that bridge is on a Group B roadway, but the belief is that really that bridge widening needs to happen associated with interchange improvements with Interstate 95, and that really for those interchange improvements to work, that the bridge needs to be widened as well. So you're going to see that project actually show up in another table here in just a minute. So going on to the next group of roadways, or Group B roadways. Again, these are the other arterial roadways and local initiatives. And the River of the Sea TPO has established a policy that they will protect the top 5 priority projects that are in the work program and what they call the Transportation Improvement Program. Now you see 6, but that's because the last 2 segments were one project that were broken into 2 pieces to reflect how the funding becomes available. So these projects here are protected. We are making the assumption in the plan that these are definitely projects in the cost feasible plan. The next group of projects on the next slide represent other projects and local initiatives that were in the previous 2040 long-range transportation plan. So we have to update the long-range transportation plan every 5 years. These projects were in the previous plan, but these projects are not protected and can be reprioritized and considered against other priorities. We do want to highlight the top project that's identified local initiatives, kind of explain that. That includes things like technology improvements, signal control, operational improvements. And so basically this is a box of money to fund improvements on the state highway system It includes being able to address things such as the rollout of new technologies that allow the transportation system to communicate with vehicles and vice versa. But again, these projects are not protected. We would think that they're probably a high priority because they were in the previous plan, but we could see projects potentially drop out. And then the next slide is additional projects under this category, and I've got two groups here. One are additional state projects that could be considered for funding, and you can see that Tomoka River Bridge project as project IDQ being reported. And again, these projects can compete with the others, as can that bottom group of 4 projects that were recently identified by Volusia County as being needs they'd like to see funded. So that pretty much wraps up both the Group A and Group B projects. The Group C projects, those are prioritized on a local basis, and we'll get more information. We'll be reporting on that. So with that, we'd like to wrap up our part of the presentation and ask you to join the conversation. We're interested in hearing from you. We'd like to know, do you agree that the projects included in the preliminary cost feasible plan are the right projects? Is there something you think's missing? Is there anything that you would do to improve the plan? And is there other information that you think is important that we should consider